Hey everyone, and happy Black Friday.
Yeah.
We hope you all snag some awesome deals, maybe even on OtisWho Network, our sponsor for this deep dive. But while you're all out there shopping, we're going to be diving into a case that's been generating like a ton of conversation online. It's
Yeah.
pretty complex, pretty thought-provoking.
Yeah, very complex for sure.
Yeah.
This case is from a conversation we found online. And it centers around this relationship between a man and a transgender woman.
Okay.
And it brings up, all these different issues: honesty, identity, the law.
Right, and I think what really struck me right away was just how raw the emotions are, especially from the man in this case.
Yeah.
He says he had no idea about the woman's past, her gender history, until after they'd, been intimate.
Exactly. And when you look at the source material, I mean, his reaction is just so intense. He uses words like betrayal, violation. He even compares it to like being sold a defective product, like he was tricked.
Wow.
Yeah, he actually says he felt like a victim of false advertising.
That's heavy. So he obviously felt incredibly deceived, but things, they escalated way beyond hurt feelings, unfortunately.
Yeah, for sure.
He ended up shooting the transgender woman, which led to, her death, and then a 50-year prison sentence for him.
It's a really tragic situation. And during the plea hearing, the judge actually questioned the man's actions directly. He's like, why didn't you just walk out?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the judge actually said, I can't fathom you would react so viscerally as to shoot somebody. He also said that no one did anything to you.
So the judge is really struggling with like this idea of a proportional response. Like, was taking a life in this context, was that really justified? I mean, that's a big question, and it's definitely one that's, sparked a lot of debate online.
Absolutely. I mean, you see people arguing that the transgender woman's actions, that constitutes a form of sexual assault because there wasn't what they consider, informed consent. But then on the other hand, you have people who see the man's reaction as totally extreme, you know? They say that walking away, that was the appropriate response. That was the better option.
Okay, so before we get into like all those different viewpoints, I think we need to kind of define some of the terms here. Like, what exactly do we mean by informed consent in this specific situation?
That's a really good point. Legally speaking, informed consent means that a person willingly agrees to engage in sexual activity with full knowledge of all the relevant facts, right? So in this case, the big question is, was this guy's consent truly informed, given that he apparently didn't know about her past?
Yeah, and this is where the conversation kind of gets into these deeply held beliefs about gender identity, sexual orientation, the very definition of consent, right?
Absolutely.
And so to really understand all the complexities here, I think we need to kind of dig into the specifics of the case and look at all these different perspectives that people are sharing online.
Yeah, definitely. So let's dive into some more specifics about the case, looking at this online conversation that we've been talking about. The source material, it refers to the transgender woman as shaman.
Okay.
And according to the man, he was totally unaware of, her gender history until after they had, been intimate.
And from his words, I mean, it's pretty clear that this revelation just triggered all these feelings of like, betrayal and violation. He uses this analogy, comparing the situation to like buying a lemon car.
Yeah.
As if he was like sold something that wasn't what it was supposed to be.
Right, like he was tricked somehow.
Yeah, exactly.
That comparison really highlights that feeling of like being deceived, And tragically, his reaction to this perceived deception was to shoot Shaman, which, as we know, led to her death and his 50-year sentence. And during the plea hearing, the judge actually expressed his bewilderment. Like, he really couldn't understand why the man hadn't just left the situation.
Right.
He said, why didn't you just walk out? And then he went on to say, I can't fathom you would react so viscerally as to shoot somebody. He also added, no one did anything to you.
So it seems like the judge is really, grappling with this idea of whether the man's actions were a proportionate response to the situation, right? Like, should he have just left when he found out?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? And the judge's statement, when he says the family will suffer forever and you will have this long sentence, I mean, that really emphasizes the just utter devastation that this act caused for everyone involved.
It really does. And his words also kind of highlight that there were other options available, right? Like walking away, as the judge suggested. But this is where the online discussion gets really, really tricky.
Yeah.
Because some people, they actually echo the man's feelings. They argue that what Shaman did, not disclosing her gender history, that actually constitutes a form of sexual assault.
Right, right.
Because there wasn't what they considered to be, informed consent.
Exactly. They're saying that her actions invalidated his consent somehow, because he wasn't fully aware of the situation.
Right. But then, of course, you have the other side of the argument. People who strongly believe that his reaction was completely over the top, totally disproportionate to the situation.
Right.
And they say that walking away, like the judge said, was the more appropriate, the less harmful option.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the man's actions were obviously extreme, but it raises some really important legal questions about proportionality, especially in self-defense cases.
Okay, so can you talk a bit more about that? Like, how does proportionality apply here?
Sure. So in legal terms, proportionality means that the force you use in self-defense has to be, reasonably matched to the threat you're facing.
Right.
So in this case, the whole debate hinges on whether the man truly believed he was in imminent danger, and if so, whether shooting Shaman was a justifiable response to that danger.
And the judge, it seems like he didn't really think the situation called for that kind of extreme reaction, right?
Yeah. Exactly. The judge's questioning suggests that he didn't see the situation as warranting lethal force. And, this is a really multifaceted situation with strong opinions on both sides.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like we're seeing two completely different interpretations of what happened, and they're both based on different ideas about consent, responsibility, and the impact of, deception in relationships.
Exactly. It's about how we interpret the situation, but it also goes beyond the legal judgments,
Mhm.
It digs into those messy human emotions, personal beliefs, and how we navigate this ever-evolving landscape of gender identity and sexual interactions.
And speaking of navigating that landscape, the online conversation also brings up some, uncomfortable things about language.
Yeah.
Some of the terms that are used to refer to shaman, they're undeniably offensive and insensitive.
For sure.
It's a really stark reminder of the prejudice and discrimination that transgender individuals face, on a daily basis.
Absolutely. It's crucial to acknowledge that. But it's also important to remember the context of this conversation, right? It's taking place in a specific online community.
So you're saying that maybe we should consider the source a little bit.
Well, not necessarily consider the source, but understand that this particular online community seems to be a place where people express strong opinions, often without any filters.
Okay.
So analyzing this case and the discussions surrounding it requires, a delicate balance. We need to be sensitive to the harmful language while recognizing that it reflects the raw and unfiltered nature of some online spaces.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a reminder that we need to approach these conversations with a lot of empathy and understanding, even when we encounter viewpoints that we find challenging or offensive.
Exactly. And I think it's also important to highlight something that you pointed out earlier from the source material.
Oh, you mean the comment about needing more laws?
Yes, exactly. That statement really reveals a desire for stricter legal frameworks around gender identity and disclosure in relationships. It shows that this case, it's not just about these two individuals. It's sparked a debate about how society as a whole should legally and ethically address situations where there's deception about gender identity in intimate contexts.
It all comes back to that question we talked about earlier, right? Like, how do we define and legislate consent in such a complex and ever-changing social landscape?
Exactly. It's a question without easy answers, but it's one that demands our attention, for sure.
Definitely. This case, as tragic and extreme as it is, really forces us to grapple with some really fundamental questions about honesty, transparency, and the boundaries of consent, especially as our understanding of gender identity continues to evolve.
You're absolutely right. And as we continue exploring this case, we'll delve deeper into those questions and look at the potential implications for the legal system and for society as a whole.
Tough, right? Like this whole case, all the reactions to it,
Yeah.
it really forces us to look at those, those gray areas of how people interact.
Yeah.
It's tempting to get caught up in the legal stuff or try to label things as right or wrong, but, we got to remember this is about real people, real choices, real consequences, real tragedy.
It really is. And what's so interesting to me is how this case is it's like a Rorschach test for society.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it reveals our own biases, our own assumptions. Like, if you were in a situation like this, how would you define consent? What things would make you judge the situation differently? It's not about finding easy answers, right?
Right.
It's about starting a conversation, encouraging people to really think critically about these issues.
Yeah, and even though we can't condone violence, we have to at least try to understand what led to it. I mean, this guy, he felt so betrayed, so violated, and his response, even though it was extreme, it came from a place of real pain, It really highlights how important open and honest communication is in any relationship, especially intimate ones.
Absolutely. And if we zoom out a bit, look at the bigger picture, this case brings up questions about societal expectations and pressures, right?
Okay.
We're living in a world where gender identity is becoming more and more fluid. Those traditional binary ideas are being challenged, and that can lead to a lot of confusion, a lot of uncertainty, just like we see in this case.
Right, right.
And it's important to remember that the transgender community, they face these unique challenges: discrimination, prejudice, violence. This case, it's a tragic example of the vulnerabilities that transgender people might experience, especially in intimate relationships.
Yeah, it reminds us that we need to approach these conversations with sensitivity, with empathy, recognizing that there are real people with real feelings behind these headlines. It's not just an abstract debate. It's about human lives
Yeah.
and the very real pain that comes from, deception and miscommunication.
Yeah, and that comment we saw in the source material about wanting stricter laws.
Right.
It's understandable, right? People want clear guidelines, they want a sense of justice, but laws alone, they can't fix these complex issues around gender identity, disclosure, and consent.
Right.
Real progress, it requires open dialogue, education, a willingness to engage with these topics in a thoughtful and nuanced way.
It's about creating a society where everyone feels safe, everyone feels respected, no matter their gender identity. And that takes more than just laws, right? It takes understanding, empathy, and a real commitment to open communication.
Exactly. This deep dive, it's taken us through some pretty tough, emotionally charged territory.
Yeah, it has,
We've explored a case that honestly raises more questions than it answers.
for sure.
And it's forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world we live in.
It's a reminder that, we might want those black and white answers, but reality is usually full of shades of gray.
Yeah.
And as we navigate all of that, it's crucial to approach each other with understanding, empathy, and, keep those lines of communication open.
That's so important. So as you all keep sifting through those Black Friday deals, we hope this deep dive gave you something even more valuable to think about. A deeper understanding of these complex issues, the importance of open communication, and how crucial empathy and respect are, especially in a world that's constantly changing. Thanks for joining us as a